Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pause for Pedagogy, a conversation with Amy Barnes, alongside the International Leadership Association. My name is Lisa Endersby, and I am an educational developer with the Teaching Commons at York University and a co-editor of the Pause for Pedagogy series. The ILA and I are thrilled to welcome Amy to our latest conversation in the Pause for Pedagogy series. So welcome, Amy. We'd love if you could start our conversation today with telling us a little bit about you.
Thank you. Yes, I am a faculty member at Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm in the higher education and student affairs program there. Although while I teach in the higher ed program, I also oversee undergraduate leadership courses in the leadership studies minor, and I teach both leadership classes for graduate students and undergraduate students. I'm also the director of the brand new EDD program that we are offering starting this fall at Ohio State for higher education.
Awesome. So a fairly busy plate, it sounds like, and lots of interesting insights about leadership and pedagogy. Absolutely. Thanks, Amy. So we have a few questions for you about your article. And the first question is kind of our overarching why question, if you will. So what key question or questions were you hoping to answer in writing this article?
I actually got a lot of questions about the topic of the article from colleagues over the course of the last few years. We had a fairly successful run with this consulting project that I have done as a part of my undergraduate leadership classes. And I've done it in a few different iterations, but I always get questions. The biggest question I get is, how did you actually come to make this happen? Because typically I'm partnering with companies or organizations in the Columbus area, exposing my students to how leadership works within those organizations, but also giving them an opportunity to work directly with somebody in a fairly significant position within that company. And people are often surprised that I got someone to say yes to that or got that company on board with a class to do work in a classroom. So it's a question I get a lot. I think it was fun for me to try to put it in writing and see if I could share it with a broader audience. Just a few tidbits on sort of how to make something like that happen, how to make it a meaningful experience for students, how to make it more than just a fun project, but something that they actually get something meaningful out of it in terms of their own personal leadership development or their perspectives on leadership.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're speaking to a lot of some of the recent conversations we've been having in Pause for Pedagogy is this surprise, which I think you put quite aptly, that others, especially people outside of the academy or just outside of our own institutions, might be able and willing to be partners in this type of pedagogy. So I think your article is really going to resonate with a lot of people who are looking to make these more meaningful experiences happen for students where we're really integrating the community in a much more meaningful way. So exciting that we have this opportunity to learn from you.
Yeah.
So thinking about then that question and how you've begun to integrate the community into your leadership pedagogy, can you tell me more about the practice or maybe the pedagogy that you discuss in the article? Where did the idea or need for this work come from?
Yeah. So the one that I highlight in the article is that we had a partnership for about 4 years with Jenny's Ice Cream. And if you haven't looked up Jenny's Ice Cream or aren't familiar with it, it's an artisan ice cream. It started out as a scoop shop here in Columbus and has grown tremendously over the last, 6 or 7 years, I think, to now that you can find Jenny's Ice Cream in like a Whole Foods in a pint that you can purchase in any country or any city in the US and even in some other countries. So they've expanded significantly in the last few years. Jenny is a little bit of a local celebrity because she is very creative in her marketing, and her flavors even are more inspired from smell in some ways or texture than they are from taste. And then she gets really creative about how she puts ice cream together. So students we're very excited about Jenny's Ice Cream just from hey, I want to go have some Jenny's Ice Cream, and so when I announced in my class that this was going to be the partnership and the project, there was a lot of enthusiasm and excitement, and that I did anticipate. And what I wanted was engagement from the students around a group project, most of my students groan the moment I mentioned that there's going to be a group project as part of a leadership course, because they've had very negative experiences in the past. So for them to have something to get excited about from the beginning, that topically this is going to be something that they enjoy. It's an organization that has a good reputation in town, and so something that they were excited to be a part of. And when I mentioned that the vice president, the CEO, was really interested in actually using potentially some of the ideas that they might come up with as part of their project, that they might actually get to see things that they come up with get implemented as part of the company's strategy, that was really important to the students to have that meaningful experience behind a class project, and it made them invest more in the project experience. They met deadlines, they got together and were excited about their work sessions out class, which is hard to sometimes, motivate students to do. And I would say pretty much across the board. I mean, it wasn't like a few students were excited and the rest were just along for the ride. I mean, I think really the entire course, which is usually about 20 to 25 students for a leadership class that I teach, that everyone was equally excited about it. And I think for me, that then allows me to, as the instructor, bring out more of the learning outcomes and the goals that I have for their takeaways from it, because they're invested, so they're obviously going to get more out of it if they're putting more into it. And they're more concerned with what will the CEO of Jenny's think of my project, in addition to what will my instructor think of my project. So there's an elevated level of expectation, I think, that came into that. And it allowed me to push them in ways that I wouldn't have been able to if it was something that they weren't as excited about.
Mm-hmm. And I can't help but think too, this notion of meaningful and investment seems to come from, there's a personal history behind whoever you have coming into the classroom, and that they know who this person is and they know their story and they know their background. And of course, I was just excited when you started talking about ice cream, which I'm sure is a whole other conversation that would help me as a student to be motivated. But I appreciate the fact that you're talking about this community partner as a person, that there is that investing to support them and help them, and what do they think of what I'm doing, but it comes from this personal relationship and connection much more than maybe it comes from the academic power relation or the academic authority of, I want you to do this for me. Like, there's a with relationship there that's really cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I will say, I mean, I knew about John, though, the CEO of Jenny's. I had heard about him before I even met with him, and I knew he was going to be a more positive example of leadership than not. I mean, just from what I'd heard about him. So I knew he was going to spend some time, come into my classroom, and be somewhat personal with the students in a way that helped me pick that as my company to approach first. I had some other ideas too, but I'd had students that worked there. You can read about them. You can tell from interviews that he's very personable. And so I knew that was not too risky of a potential connection. That helps. I would advise that for anyone thinking about doing something like this, that you also think about the people, not just the company.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good point. So what were your learning outcomes for this particular class or partnership, and how did you assess whether your students were meeting those outcomes?
So it's funny, I joke with my students that the learning outcomes have nothing to do with the actual project itself. It is really a great lesson in leadership, I think, because the project itself was really for John and really for Jenny's to benefit from potentially some great ideas that my students might generate around a problem that he presented them, which the problem changed every year, so it doesn't really matter as much. And I would always tell them the presentation, I'm going to grade you a little bit on the professionalism of your presentation, but that's really for John, and honestly, you want to do well in that because he's the CEO of Jenny's. So that motivates you for that piece of it. What I'm interested in is what you learn about your personal leadership style, about how you interact in teams and groups. We did, I think I mentioned this in the article, we did the Strengths Finder with the students, as well as emotionally intelligent leadership assessment, and how they apply what they learned about themselves and about others from both of those in terms of their group interactions, and reflecting on that regularly. I think was what I wanted them to get out of it. It's not so much, hey, I can put together, a presentation that's excellent for a CEO. That's great. I want you to be excited about that and that accomplishment. But I'm more interested in the group dynamic, how you navigated that process, how you developed your ideas, how you set your vision, and I want you to reflect on the process, not the end result. Mm. And so those were, the ways that I talked with them openly about my focus and where my grade was going to come from. And so I had them write a 6 to 8 page paper at the end about answering a lot of those questions. What did you contribute? What were the group dynamics like? Analyze those group dynamics. How did you empower others? How did you feel empowered by your teammates? Did you give and receive feedback in your group? What contributions did each person make to make the team more effective? How did you see your teammates' strengths playing a role? How did you see their emotionally intelligent leadership capacities at play? All of those different pieces and parts, really having them dig in and do some analysis about the process was and I told them that's your grade, and that's the crux of your grade, is that paper and how rich that content is and how you relate it back to both readings and class discussions. Great job on the presentation. That's super fun. But what I really want you to learn is the leadership process from this.
Mm-hmm. And I can just imagine how much more, not just meaningful, but how much more transferable those skills are, that they're actually able to think about this process as being, oh, I have these skills now, or maybe I had them already and I've developed them, and now I might actually be able to use them in some way. So I spent a lot of time at York talking about experiential learning, and I just see such a lovely fit for what you're doing in that process too, that they are really learning from an experience and building on an experience that they're having. Yep. And I also appreciate too what you're saying. It's great that you've got this lovely final product, but it really is the formative process that you're interested in.
And John and I joked about that too from the beginning. I said, that part's yours, because he was like, well, what? Mm-hmm. I'm getting a huge benefit out of this. What are you getting from this? Because clearly this is a lot of work for you. And I said, the teaching, the pedagogy, the learning that's going to come from this experience, because they're more invested, so he would joke, I've got this part, Amy's got that part, we're tag teaming this. And that was a nice relationship to have.
Awesome. So that might be a nice segue then for my last question, because you have this relationship. Maybe this is part of your answer, I don't know. But where do you see future research or writing or maybe even teaching headed in this area? What will you be writing or teaching or thinking about next?
So, I've moved a little bit on from the Jenny's project and trying to think about other ways to engage my students. I also have another class where I've partnered with a charter school in Columbus called the KIPP School, where my students are, taking what they learn in my classroom and trying to teach leadership to 7th graders, 9th graders, different age groups at this KIPP School. And it's about taking those lessons learned and thinking about how to then, because we all know we learn better through teaching. So how do we teach and facilitate leadership development in others? And so I've taken this concept and this partnering concept and tried to apply it maybe more in like a service learning type context. I wouldn't say that it's fully developed service learning, but it's on the way to being good service learning. But I think leadership classes, in however you can connect for students, that there is a real world connection happening here. We are studying theory, or we are studying process and, analyzing organizations and things like that. But we're doing that, in the context of our classroom, but it has direct applicability to your future in your career, to your future in, your volunteer world, wherever you live and work. You're going to see this playing out in real life. And so giving them opportunities to do that, making experiences, learning leadership more meaningful for them is sort of what I'm after as a teacher. And that it just seems to resonate well with them. That real world applicability, practical approach, really just, I get positive feedback from the students that that's what they want. And so I try to, it's extra work. It is absolutely extra work as a teacher to develop those partnerships and to, maintain them, to stay in contact with the partner throughout the semester. I go to the KIPP school every single time, you know, with the students, or I have a grad student who goes if I can't, you know, just all that organization and scheduling and, you know, time outside of class and things like that. It's an extra investment, but I see the benefit in the students and their growth and development. So it's worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like my brain keeps going back to this notion of experiential learning, but the idea of making that plan for action at the end and why is it meaningful and what am I going to do next, and tying that back to employability and tying that back to, as you said, this practical outside the brick and mortar of the institution application. I'm not surprised that your students are finding that to be such a positive and meaningful experience, because it's in part why they're potentially in that class in the first place, that they're hoping to build those skills that will serve them well once they get out into jobs or more schooling or whatever it is they do after graduation.
Yep. And we do, you know, leadership studies, we do a lot of simulations and case studies, and I do think a lot of those are helpful forms of pedagogy, but I have had a ton of success with getting them actually out in the organization or in the, you know, situation to really see how it plays out.
Yeah. Very cool. So is there anything else that you wanted to add or share? Is there any question I asked or didn't ask that you'd like to answer? Anything else that you wanted to share as sort of a final thought about your article and the topic?
I don't think so. I'm just happy to be a resource for anyone that has questions about how to sort of make something like this happen in their own leadership classes. So, I mean, I'm sure my email and information will be out there, and that's fine. I'm happy to be that resource for folks.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Amy, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Pause for Pedagogy is an initiative of the Leadership Education Member Interest Group of the International Leadership Association. All of our articles and videos are available at www.ila-net.org. You can also follow us on Twitter at @the_ILA. Thanks so much, Amy, again, and I'm sure that we'll have a few more questions for you coming your way soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.